everyone. Before we start the video, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for 950 subscribers. We are so close to 1,000. I know it's not the biggest number, but it's always been a childhood dream of mine, so it's going to be nice to achieve it. And if you guys like this style of chapter retrospective, I've been playing Dead by Daylight since chapter 5, the release of the Huntress. So let me know down in the comments on what chapter you would like to see me talk about next. I have a few chapters in mind, but considering there's currently 34 chapters within Dead by Daylight, one coming out every couple of months, I'll definitely be able to listen to what you guys want more. Also, I have a Twitter if that's your cup of tea, so there you go. Now with that being said, let me set the mood. It's November 2022, and Forged in Fog just released. And to really understand the disappointment that was coming in March, let's take a look at everything that was added in Forged in Fog really quickly. Keep in mind that Dead by Daylight only gets 4 chapters a year, maybe sometimes more in the terms of paragraphs, but we only see 4 new killers a year, the big main thing that keeps the game going. But let's see what behavior dropped for one of the 4 main content updates of the year. Starting off with the main attraction of Forged in Fog, the Night. A killer who felt like he was always coming. A night killer felt like it would always fit in Dead by Daylight, but just wasn't in the game yet. It was a concept of a killer that one day people knew was eventually going to join the Fog. But what power would behavior give this ancient medieval night killer? Sadly, a power heavily dependent on AI. After the AI on the Nemesis zombies, I'm surprised behavior made a power entirely dependent on AI. And in typical behavior fashion, the Knight was very buggy on launch, but maybe the perks for the Knight are good? Starting off with Nowhere to Hide, his first perk is definitely his best. Nowhere to Hide is an aura perk that reveals the aura of survivors within 24 meters of your position for 5 seconds after kicking a generator. This perk is pretty decent and worked really well with an aura build or just to find survivors that might be hiding nearby. Hex Face the Darkness. His second perk is a Hex perk that just makes survivors scream every now and again, as long as you have an injured survivor to activate the Hex. It's not that powerful, but it can synergize very well with a few things. Hubris, his third and final perk, will expose the survivor when they stun you for 20 seconds, and then it will go on cooldown for another 20 seconds. It's a pretty cool sounding perk, but honestly, I don't get much use out of it, and when I go up against killers using it, they typically don't get any value either, even though I always drop every pallet on them. Going into the killer himself, the Knight, I'm not going to fully dissect him because a lot of you probably already know what he does. It's not very different from what he does now, but it's a lot more disappointing. So the killer isn't very good and his perks are very whatever, but what about the survivor? Ah, Vittorio! Cool, he's a medieval themed survivor from thousands of years ago and he has some pretty cool cosmetics. But sadly all survivors are just reskins, so let's just check out the perks he had on launch. Potential Energy is one of the most interesting perks. Basically, when you're working on a generator, you can take the progress but not gain any and go apply it to another generator, but only up to about 20% of a generator's progress. If you get hit with how many stacks you have, you will lose all of your progress. Thogwise, it's basically just alert but goes off every time you hit a skill check. Quick Gambit, I'm not even going to bother my time talking about this perk, so let's carry on. Well, thankfully this chapter came with a map, the Decimated Borgo. And it's very red. Like, very, very red. I sure hope this map isn't physically impossible to play for people with different forms of colorblindness. Thankfully, this was changed later to make the map more appealing to the eyes, but not until almost a full year and a half later. But most community feedback from the chapter was the same, mostly negative reviews across the board, criticizing the buggy gameplay of the Knight and the overuse of red on the Borgo. But overall, it just seemed to be a disappointing chapter that didn't really hit the mark, even though there are some people that definitely did enjoy it. The mid-chapter we received after Forged in Fog offered some pretty cool stuff, however. We finally got the highly anticipated Survivor Activity HUD, so solo queue isn't nearly as dreadful, even though it's still horrible to play. Some balance and quality of life changes to the Knight, and a huge, long, highly requested nerf to the Nurse. And yeah, behavior also tried to castrate the Eyrie of Crows to make it more balanced, but I promise you that hasn't changed the amount of times I've seen survivors bring the fucking Crow's Eye. Shortly after the mid-chapter, we were approaching chapter season. Speculation was wild in the community. It's also extremely important to note that before the release of Tools of Torment, we knew a majority of last year's content due to a major leak. The following chapters had a majority of their content leaked. Roots of Dread, Resident Evil Project W, and Forged in Fog were all leaked online. They were all leaked to different levels of severity, like only knowing some of the content in the chapter like Project W, or in the case of Roots of Dread, having absolutely everything revealed before the chapter is officially announced. This was the first time in a long time that a Dead by Daylight chapter wasn't fully leaked before release, and Behavior was ready to get the community excited with some teasers for Chapter 27. So with that being said, let's take a look at some of the teasers Behavior released. Firstly, we have this video teaser that was released that I will play now. Ooh, okay. An original chapter? And it looks to be some sort of sci-fi killer? Maybe a cyborg killer? Anyways, I haven't seen people in the community this hyped in a minute. People in the community in the comments saying what they think it's gonna be, showing their excitement for the new chapter, and a lot of that was due to this being the first chapter in a while that had not been leaked beforehand. But speaking of leaks, Behavior did do a little bit of a silly and accidentally put the name of all three of the new characters into the tag for the video. But that's okay, we only know their names now. Huh, the Skull Merchant. Sounds like a human harvester, a killer who builds robots out of human parts. Or maybe some cyborg created from a mad scientist designed to kill people. But Behavior would also drop this teaser, making some people think that the killer would be able to upgrade themselves as the match went on, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And the night before the PTB for Chapter 27, aka Tools of Torment, this photo starts making the rounds online. And I remember seeing this exactly right before I went to bed. For the night of the PTB, I was so excited to see what the new chapter had, but then I was instantly disappointed. Not because I just had the chapter spoiled for myself, but because the killer doesn't really look like a, killer. I'm fine when Behavior makes human killers, there's not a problem with it. But she felt too clean and genuinely not scary. Obviously not every killer has to be scary, and we can honestly debate if Dead by Daylight is even a horror game anymore. But I remember when the Trickster released, I was also very disappointed. A lot of it came from his design just being, a K-pop idol. His lore was very interesting and actually kind of cool and won him some points with me, but I just wanted him to get to the point where he wasn't the newest killer and he was just buried under all the newer killers and being another slot in the roster. The same thoughts and feelings with Trickster started to come back the more and more I looked at this leaked thumbnail, but maybe it was fake. As much as I wanted to think so, I feared it was real. It looked too official. I laid in bed wondering, what is her power? Maybe it was fun, maybe she will have cool lore, maybe her power will be groundbreaking. As I woke up the next day to instantly go check out Otz's new usual video showcasing the new chapter, and I see this. Welp, the leaks were real. Let's see what this chapter has to offer. Starting off with the new killer in the main part of the chapter, we have the Skull Merchant. Well, what does she do? Our little friend Skull Merchant here gets 4 drones to place wherever she chooses on the map. Once you place a drone, after a short delay, it will create a detection zone that can go through multiple floors. If there are multiple drones on the map at once, not all of them will have a detection zone, though some of them might be deactivated until being reactivated by a survivor getting caught or manually by the Skull Merchant. So what exactly do these drones do? If you were like me and hoping that the drones were going to be cameras and we were finally going to get that camera killer that was inevitable one day, well, get ready to be disappointed because that camera killer isn't coming out for another 3 months. If a survivor stands in a detection zone for too long, they will get locked on by the drone. Now, I bet that sounds really cool. So what's going to happen? Is the drone going to start chasing them? Wait, that sounds like the night all over again. Oh, no worries. Once you're in the lock-in zone for long enough, you become exposed. Oh, another exposed power? And when you disable a drone, you're forced to have a claw trap, which gives the Skull Merchant your location at all times, as long as she checks her tracker. After some times, you're able to remove the claw trap with a fun interactive minigame that's also the same one for hacking the drones. Well, that's her power, and before we get into the controversy that stirred up, remember, even though killers are the biggest part of chapters, we still have a lot of content that, I don't know, might win the chapter back, or at least have something positive. Maybe her perks are good? Let's take a look at them. Firstly, we have Game Afoot. While you're chasing the obsession, this perk activates. Damaging generators and destroying breakable walls and pallets give you 5% haste for 10 seconds. Additionally, anytime you hit a survivor with the most amount of chase time, that survivor will become the obsession. Thwack. After hooking a survivor, perform the break action on the next breakable wall or pallet to make survivors within 32 meters scream and reveal their aura for 4 seconds. Lastly, we have Leverage. Each time you hook a survivor, gain up to 1 token, up to 10. When you hook a survivor, this perk activates. For each token, reduces the speed at which survivors are healed by 5% for 30 seconds. Welp, other than Game Afoot and Rancor sounding pretty interesting, her perks are just completely dog shit. They don't really do much, and honestly, there's other perks that do what they do, but way better. There's gotta be something positive about this chapter, maybe on the survivor side? Speaking of which, we have 2 brand new original survivors. What about them? We received the Lyra Siblings, Thanito and Renato Lyra, survivors from Brazil. Oh yeah, the Skull Merchant is also from Brazil, but we'll eat her alive later.
Mario, you are going to Brazil.
As cool as it is to receive our first original chapter with 2 survivors, at the end of the day, survivors are just reskins, but it was cool to see our first Brazilian characters. But the Lyra twins, that's 2 survivors. The other time we've seen 2 survivors, they were typically hit chapters with Stranger Things and Resident Evil. And you know what 2 survivors means? 6! 6 brand new survivor perks, and I really hope they're really innovative and shake up gameplay for the next coming months before we receive the Midchapter and the next chapter. So, let's go check them out. Starting off with Thalitas Perks, firstly we have Cut Loose. After performing a rushed vault and chase, this perk activates. While active, your rush vaults are silent for 6 seconds, and successfully performing a rushed vault during that time resets the timer, then the perk goes on cooldown for 45 seconds. Secondly, we have Friendly Competition. When you finish repairing a generator with at least 1 other survivor, this perk activates. You and the other survivor who finished repairing the generator with you will get a 5% repair progress for 75 seconds. Lastly, we have Teamwork Power of 2. Whenever you finish healing another survivor, you both move 5% faster as long as you stay within 12 meters of the survivor you healed until one of you loses a health state. Well, respectively, I think those are some of the worst dogshit perks that have ever been put into this game. Like, genuinely, they don't help out and they will never reach into the meta. Not that every perk has to, but these new teamwork perks aren't very good, and I genuinely can't think of a single situation where any of these perks can be helpful. Maybe her twin brother brought some better teachable perks with him. Well, let's see what Renato brought with him. Firstly, we have Background Player. After you unhook another survivor, break into a sprint at 150% of your normal running speed for 6 seconds and gain exhaustion for 40 seconds. Secondly, we have Blood Rush. This perk activates once you're 1 hook away from instant death. While healthy and suffering from exhaustion, press the active ability button to instantly lose 1 health state and recover from exhaustion instantly. Lastly, we have Teamwork Collective Stealth. When another survivor finishes healing you, you both leave no scratch marks as long as you stay within 12 meters of the survivor who healed you, or at least until one of you loses a health state. Welp, her brother left me completely and utterly disappointed. Somehow, he has even worse perks. Genuinely, there's not going to be a single use gained out of any of these perks. And it added arguably one of the worst exhaustion perks of all time. But at the time, a lot of people thought that Blood Rush was actually going to be a meta perk and be that new main survivor hit perk that everyone uses. I mean, Blood Rush lets you potentially use your exhaustion perk twice in chase. That has to be great. I wonder how it's doing now. Oh, that's how it's doing. Also, keep in mind while we're down here, look how many other bottom of the barrel perks were released in Tools of Torment. Let's count while we're down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep in mind that Tools of Torment released with 6 survivor perks, double the amount we typically receive, and 5 out of 6 of them are among some of the most unused and shitty survivor perks we have ever received. But what was that one? That one survivor perk that's not at the bottom of the barrel? Ah yes, Background Player. Well, it's important to note that the version of perks I just went over was the PTB version of all the perks, but don't worry, Behavior had a chance to adjust them for the live release of Tools of Torment. So let's take a look at what they did. But before that, they also did change the Red Forest realm, giving it the graphical update that the Realm Beyond does. Also, side note, they did this at the very beginning of 2023, and now it's 2025, and the swamp still hasn't fucking been graphically updated. This is the last time the Realm Beyond got updated, and guess what? People hated it. Somehow, they turned the Red Forest worse. It's a bit better now, But on release, it was horrible. Speaking of maps, the Skull Merchant dropped her little piece of shit in the Trapper's backyard, so now the Trapper's worst map is associated with the worst, most annoying killer in Dead by Daylight history. But honestly, that was probably the best addition to come into the game in this entire chapter. Anyways, let's go take a look at what they changed between the PTB and live. Well, they made Thwack a little less shitty. And okay, they completely reworked background player, making it a very viable exhaustion perk now. Now the perk activates when the killer picks up a survivor. It's really good for blinding saves or just reaching the hook in time to sabotage. That makes sense on why it's not at the very bottom of the barrel with the rest of the poor excuses for survivor perks that came out with Tools of Torment. I bet if they never made that change, it would have just sat along with every other survivor perk that was released in that update. But what about the Skull Merchant's perks? Where are they sitting on the pick rate lists? Oh, okay, 2 out of 3 of her perks are at the very bottom, that's no surprise. Also, now that the community has had their hands on Skull Merchant for just a little, let's see how it's all going. Oh, everybody hates her. Skull Merchant, she is one of the most frustrating killers to go up against, and honestly, it just did not hit the mark for a killer in Dead by Daylight. Her power makes no sense, her lore is one of the dumbest things I've ever sat down to read. Basically, the Skull Merchant's dad left her because all of her life the Skull Merchant has never been wanted by anybody, but don't worry, because the Skull Merchant became a self-made millionaire after making Brazilian manga. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm reading my script. Is Brazilian manga even a fucking thing? Brazilian manga. Anyways, before her dad left, he was working on a Brazilian manga about the Skull Merchant, and I guess she was really bored with her extreme levels of daddy issues and just became a real version of what her dad made in the comics, maybe just wanting to get his attention. Also, not really an appealing killer. I know I mentioned earlier with Trickster, but she just doesn't fit. You can argue as long as you want if Dead by Daylight's even a horror game anymore. Some would agree and some would disagree, but there's nothing about the Skull Merchant that screams intimidating or scary, and that stays true even with her cosmetics. Firstly, she's wearing a diamond-covered mask with a majority of her face exposed. Like, why even bother putting on the mask at that point if you're just gonna show half of your face? And the Skull Merchant's weapon is literally just the Predator arm blade. Like, Behavior was like, hey Disney, could we borrow this idea? And Disney's like, oh, well, you know, change it up a bit and don't let them know you copied me. But honestly, I could stomach a killer's bad lore and design, at least if they have a decent power. But like we got into earlier, Skull Merchant does not have a good power. Her power is actually so bad, in fact, that Dead by Daylight had to add a brand new game mechanic just to fix a problem that she increased. But everyone's so upset at Skull Merchant that a big cope train starts to go throughout the community, people claiming that the Skull Merchant was supposed to be the Predator, and Behavior had lost the license, and Behavior had to come up with slop on the spot. Because she's a hunter, and her blade is literally the Predator's blade, a lot of people connected the dots, but considering 2 chapters from now we would receive Alien, and if you don't know, Alien is owned by Disney, who also owns Predator, and I genuinely do believe Behavior has the license rights for a Predator chapter, and has just been waiting 1 or 2 years after the Alien has been released into the game to eventually release the Predator. But going back on that problem that Skull Merchant made worse, as a lot of you probably are familiar with, the most powerful side of Dead by Daylight killer perks are typically known as regression perks, like your Pain Resonance, Pop Goes the Weasel, and Surge. What these perks do is remove high amounts of progress from generators, making it more difficult for the survivors to complete them and just halting their progression in the game, making it more difficult for the survivor to complete the generator. Now, that is the main goal of the killer, but it can be frustrating, especially when the killer consistently interrupts the survivors doing generators, and has a lot of regression perks to knock that gen down a couple pegs. Especially with some regression perks combined, knocking a gen from 90% complete to almost about 50% complete, or even worse. But in most situations, survivors could probably adapt to regression perks and get out of the situation as long as they don't 3-gen themselves. For those of you who don't know what a 3-gen situation is, a 3-gen situation can occur in a match of Dead by Daylight if survivors aren't carefully paying attention to which generators they've completed around the map. There's a total of 7 generators in a Dead by Daylight match, but as you know, you only need to complete 5 generators to escape. So when there's one last generator to complete, there's 3 generators left on the map, so killers can't focus just one singular generator. But sometimes there are situations where those last 3 generators are all extremely close to one another, so it's easy for the killer to check them and apply the regression perks to them. But killers could also force survivors into a 3-gen, but that was pretty difficult. And there wasn't any killer primarily that could just really force survivors into a 3-gen, or get them off a generator when they're not around. Until Skull Merchant. You see, because the Skull Merchant can just place her drones anywhere, most Skull Merchant players would just run 4 different regression perks, only play towards a 3-generator setup, creating situations where matches would go up to 30 to 40 minutes long, and in some situations, a complete hour, which in Dead by Daylight, when a match goes on for an hour, all survivors automatically die, and I don't even want to mention that one Chess Merchant match.
Why is it recording?
Bottom line, Skull Merchant needed to change, and throughout basically every other update for the next year straight, Skull Merchant at least received one change, ranging from minor number tweaks to full kit changes, but Skull Merchant was still extremely oppressive, maybe a bit weaker, but very good on 3-genning still. And because of the incentivized playstyle of Skull Merchant, that brought us the worst 3-gen meta that the game has ever seen. 3-gens are already frustrating situations to find yourself in as a survivor, but going up against a Skull Merchant, a killer you probably already dislike, with multiple regression perks and a 3-gen setup, you just lose. You either go to work on the generator, you're going to get punished by getting exposed and revealed with Killer Instinct, and if you disable her drone, she's going to know where you are at all times. Matches against her became unfun and nearly impossible, at one point having an extremely high kill rate, but not because she was extremely good, but because nobody wanted to play against her. They would give up on first hook or just leave immediately because they weren't interested in dealing with a 3-gen match. Now, not every Skull Merchant played in the 3-gen playstyle, but a majority did, and honestly her playstyle incentivized it. It was the right way to play her, but it was the most frustrating for the community. But finally, in the 7.0 update, Behavior implemented a brand new system to fight against 3-gen solutions. Now, every generator has 8 regression events, allowing a generator to only be regressed up to 8 times until it can't be regressed anymore, meaning killers can't use their perks or kick a single gen an unlimited amount of times like before. But 3-gens have existed for years, and even though going up against other killers doing it, it was frustrating, it was not nearly as frustrating as Skull Merchant doing it, just because she did it better than anybody. She created a problem so bad within the general game design that they had to change the game instead of changing her. But I will agree, it was definitely a good change to the generators and a good healthy one for the game. So if she did anything good, it's getting us the regression change. But following the years we go on, Skull Merchant got hit with more and more changes. They even tried to buff some of her perks, but that didn't really do anything. Thankfully, in the 8.3.0 release, in typical behavior fashion, they took the Skull Merchant out back and shot her directly in the head and killed her. But even with my boiling hate for Skull Merchant, nothing else in this chapter is really worth anything, being one of the rare situations where we get 6 perks for the survivors, and all of them are at the bottom of the pick rates except for background player, but behavior would eventually go nerf background player as well, the only good perk to come out of this chapter. To be fair, it was a good nerf. But neither of the survivors really had good perks. Their design and lore and cosmetics were at least cool, and honestly, they were probably the only redeeming aspect of the chapter, alongside the change to Shelter Woods. But seriously, those are the only 2 things in this chapter that I can highlight as positive, because the killer that was included in the chapter completely pissed off the entire fan base, and created an extremely frustrating and genuinely game-shattering killer, along with the most whatever perks in Dead by Daylight history, and the visual rework to the Red Forest was absolutely horrible, even considered to be worse than the original upon release. Behavior didn't even drop a video about the graphical update like they typically do with the Realm Beyond, but with that being said, I think it's 100% truthful to say that Tools of Torment will go down as the biggest failure in all of Dead by Daylight. I think Skull Merchant will probably be left in a state of ruin for the rest of her existence. Unless Behavior eventually wants to try to properly fix her one day, I think the damage has been done. And I think she'll always be looked at as the black sheep in the ever-expanding killer roster of Dead by Daylight. There's a very good reason that my killer prestiges look like this. Now, I understand that a lot of this was just the general viewpoint of the community, and there was actually a small amount of people that actually really do like Tools of Torment and Skull Merchant. I'm really glad to hear that people like that can at least enjoy a piece of content that a lot of the player base hates, including myself. But that still won't change me from DCing against Skull Merchant every single time I see her, without fail. Anyways, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this style of chapter retrospective, I plan on doing more of them, hopefully one day eventually covering them all. I also make chapter speculation videos going over potential licenses that we can eventually see in Dead by Daylight, and what content they might add. But in the terms of chapter retrospectives, please let me know down in the comments on what chapter you would like me to cover next. I have my eyes on a chapter that would follow Tools of Torment, and personally one of my favorites, that being End Transmission. Also, one last thing. Behavior. Please give Chucky a Phantom of the Opera skin. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.